Roger Kaiserwall. Thanks, I see you again, Roger. And Heidi's not here, you're here. Alan Kushner is over here. Alan was new to our group. He's on a few committees. He's on community, traffic. Is there any others?
No.
Okay. Okay, yes, I'm sure it is. Minor Carter, you want to raise your hand? I saw you. Tom Baker, are you here? Thank you, Tom. And who we got? Tom. Bill Davidson is still here, second committee. Jesse Ilip is not here from environment, so Bill, you're going to be speaking to Jesse, right? Thanks. Diane is not here. Diane is here for with Martin. Diane, if you want to just raise your hand so people know who you are. Thank you. Kathy Koch is not here. Elliot Powell, are you here? No, Elliot. Greg Stewart. No, Greg. And John, I saw you. Thank you. There's John. Yes, and Nestor, are you here? Thank you. Nestor, and I apologize for the misspelling on your name. Joel, are you here? Thank you, Joel. And Tom Baker is still here, and Alan Kushner is still here. To my right is Alderwoman Finlayson, who will also speak in a second. We also have some members who were not here last week, some city staff. Cindy, you want to raise your hand?
Cindy? I'm Cindy Godinez. I'm with the Department of Planning and Zoning. I'm the city's liaison to the Critical Area Commission.
So the environment group had a couple committees about critical area, and Cindy responded. So Cindy's input actually is already on the website. If you go to the environmental tab, and we have one other gentleman. Steve?
Steve Bryce. I'm the new Economic Development Manager for the city.
Go easy on Steven. He started the same day I did. So go easier on him than you guys did on me.
Anyone else that Lynn is here, obviously. Brian, everyone was last week. And Rena is our helper. Thank you, Rena. Oh, Kathy. I'm sorry, Kathy. Kathy Edner. I marked you as yes. I apologize. Sorry. Did I skip anyone else? I'm going to turn this over. Sheila wants to say a couple words. I just want to make sure everyone's familiar with the website. You've gotten the links a number of times. We've been updating it, and when I say we, Ina's doing a fantastic job updating it regularly. I want to make sure everyone has access to it. You notice in the green box on the left are all the subcommittee names. If you click on one of those links, you see any document that has been sent to me. So I've been trying to keep the website current with all documents. Once we get anything new, like from our group, that'll be posted as well. The agenda has been posted. Okay. Thank you, Greg. So any questions on the sort of administrative things before we get started? All right. That's the call to order, and we also had the minutes from last week. Did everyone get a chance to review the minutes? Any changes?
I'd like to be added to the minutes.
You weren't added to as being present at the minutes? Is that correct? Or you didn't receive a copy of the minutes?
I wasn't in the minutes that's being preserved.
Okay. Got it.
Jared, Jackie Alsop and Greg Stewart just joined us.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Jackie Alsop and Greg
Oh,
Stewart
great.
just joined us.
Jackie, oh, there you are. Hi,
And Greg
Jackie.
Stewart.
Nice to see you. Thank you. Great. Any other administrative stuff like that? Okay. Sheila, did you want to say first?
Yeah, just wanted to pop in, roll in as I came in on my walk this morning, just had surgery, so I'm good. Wanted to say thank you again for serving on this extremely important task force. I've heard from several of you over the last week or so, and I just wanted to stress that you guys are an independent body. No one is to tell you guys how to make your decisions. You're all here because of your level of expertise or your scope of influence on possible projects. And so we need to be able to count on that expertise. So please, do not feel pressured in either way to make a decision. We want this final report to speak totally to the factual basis for any decisions that are offered to us. So I want to stress that to you, because I suspect there may be some wranglings going on. That's not what this is all about. You're here because you bring a level of professional knowledge that we value. And our city staff brings our city experiences to you. And that's why they're here as resources. just want to stress that and say thank you in advance for serving us. So important.
On the minutes, that's you, Ross, and Fred, and they're all the persons there. Yeah, I got Fred, and I wrote you like the minutes from last week.
Yeah. If you remember, I gave the opening task force. So that'll take time.
Rena, do you have all that? Thank you. Okay, great. So, structured the agenda so that each group would have 10 minutes to discuss their report and work so far. 10 minutes is obviously not enough time to discuss everything you've done and everything that's in your report. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at the report. I apologize for getting out late. I got reports late, so it's less than a 24-hour turnaround on what I got basically. So I apologize for the time to work out. Everyone had more time with the report before today. And hopefully you've read it so that each of the chairs don't need to present everything in the report. Present what you are, and it's a pull out process. Questions we had about the city staff, answer questions through. At the end of each of the subcommittees, we'll have, I know I had time set aside for David Farrell and Bob Brown to speak, so people could ask questions of them. And then we still have the last 25 minutes to discuss any remaining questions, including anything in the first report that you'd like to have edited, changed. I'll welcome that discussion. I'll leave open anyone sending me updated comments for that Word document. I can make those changes, but I'm out of town after tomorrow, so if I don't get it by, really soon, like say in the morning, give me an hour or two tomorrow to work on it, but I'd like to get out and final version of that first report to the mayor and council or staff by tomorrow afternoon. So hopefully that works. If it doesn't, we'll deal with it. But that's my thought process. So any questions so far? Business subcommittee, Darrell, do you want to start us off?
I submitted my report to Jerry. It was 2 pages long, so I tried to keep it brief and to the point. The business subcommittee was tasked with assessing the impact on the business community, the benefits and the detriments. And I decided that who's most impacted by it is anybody on Forest Drive primarily, because that's where the facility will be located, in addition to probably business owners on Skipper's Lane. So with Jared's assistance and guidance, I got access to SOFO, which is South Forest Drive Business Association, and he put me in contact with the president, Jennifer Balducci, and she gave me the listserv for all the business owners that are members of SOFO. So I immediately had access to that. In addition to that, anybody that I didn't see on the list, I either contacted by phone, like Safeway, or literally went to their door and rung the doorbell and had a conversation with them. And there's some businesses along Skipper's Lane, a law office, a weaving yarn place, and a massage place that were not members of SOFO, and had conversations with them as well. So that formed the stakeholders. Any business owner on Forest Drive, any business owner on Skipper's Lane. There are probably a lot of other business owners as well, but it was a start for me. I had to start somewhere, and to me that made the most sense. I guess after that, it was a matter of what do we need to know from this community of business owners. And initially I wanted to ask people questions and ask open-ended questions and let them give narratives and answers in that regard. But I felt it would be difficult to categorize all those narratives, and people will be given long stories, people will give you short answers, and then you would have to measure it. So I thought the best approach would be to use a survey and to give preset answers to the survey. And so for the question regarding what they see as the benefits, they had 6 selections, and they were able to rank them from highest benefit to lowest benefit in that order. And the benefits I included was more customers to the Forest Drive area, improved roads, more job opportunities, more revenue for the city, more business growth along the South Forest Drive corridor, and then I gave an other category. With the other category, I wasn't able to allow for them to write in an other. They just could specify that it was some other than that. With the detriments, I gave them 6 options, and those detriments included fewer customers as a result of moving the Department of Public Works to Forest Drive, more traffic congestion, more noise pollution, more safety concerns, less business growth along the South Forest Drive corridor, and then I gave them an other as well. To gauge people's responses to these benefits and detriments, I created a survey using SurveyMonkey, and that was my first time using it, so it was a challenge just trying to get it all on SurveyMonkey. So I got it on SurveyMonkey, and before sending a survey out, I sent everyone that I had an email address for, SOFO and non-SOFO members, email stating, this is what's going on. There's the land swap proposal in play, and we need your input on it. In addition to that, I gave them the links to the Department of Public Works website, where we had the link to the proposal as well as other documents on that website. And I asked everybody to read all the information, go to the website, read all the information first, and then take the survey. I sent out 50 surveys to 50 different businesses, and to date, I received 18 completed responses, which represents about 36%. I guess statistically, that's not bad. I'm a little disappointed, but I know anybody who's a statistician would say that's actually good. So I guess I'm good with that for the time being. I can generally share with you some of the results. Some of them were a little interesting because some questions people just chose not to answer. And I don't know if they chose not to answer because they felt like, well, if I give you my answer to the ultimate question which is, do you support the Department of Public Works moving to Forest Drive, then why do I need to answer all the other ones? So I don't know, but sometimes they didn't answer the question and other times they answered it completely. I'll go over the questions, they're fairly quick. The first question was, taking into consideration everything you know about the land swap proposal, would you choose to move the Department of Public Works facility to Forest Drive or leave it on Spa Road? All 18 people responded to that one. 72% of the people said leave it on Spa Road. 23% of the people said move it to Forest Drive. The second question was, what do you see as the greatest benefit to your business by moving the Department of Public Works facility to Forest Drive? And this is the one where you have an opportunity to rank them. I'll tell you what the top 2 responses were for that one. Interesting, 11 people answered that one, 7 people skipped it. I'm not sure why. The top benefit was more job opportunities in the community. The runner-up was improved roads. The next question was, what do you see as the greatest detriments to your business by moving the Department of Public Works facility to Forest Drive? 13 people answered that one, 5 people skipped it. The greatest detriment was more traffic congestion, and the second greatest detriment was more noise pollution. The fourth question was, as a business owner, do the benefits of moving the facility outweigh the detriments for you? And the response was, all 18 people responded to this one. 71% said the benefits do not outweigh the detriments of moving it to Forest Drive, and 29% said it did. The last question, which was like the ultimate one, I guess, in some ways. Overall, do you recommend that the city proceed with moving the Department of Public Works to Forest Drive? All 18 people responded to this one. 72% of the people said no, they do not recommend that the Department of Public Works be moved to Forest Drive, and 28% said yes. So what does it mean? I'm not sure yet. I don't think there's enough data. I would like to have more time to collect more data, get more surveys out there, get more feedback, and then report back to the committee. Well, this is what I see. this is what it may mean, and then you can decide from there. But it's 18 out of 15 businesses that were surveyed. Just looking at it as it is, it seems like so far business owners are not leaning towards moving the department to Forest Drive, based on what I know so far. Hopefully I'll have more opportunities to do more surveys, to engage more people, and get more data, so we can have information that we can feel confident about. But that's what I have so far.
I have sort of a general question, maybe it probably pertains to all the groups, but should we be doing the same thing at Spa Road? How does the business community around Spa Road feel, so that you can because we've got to weigh one versus the other, versus Spa Road's the default, and we're deciding whether to go.
Base it on.
So it's a kind of philosophical question that I think all of us have to deal with.
In this case, though, are there businesses on Spa Road?
Oh, in the case of businesses, there may not be.
Yeah.
There's certainly none close by the way there is on Forest. Schools, right?
I was gonna say schools.
Schools,
If
yeah.
One of our school buildings is used.
Can I ask about, one of the questions was about road improvements. What did you have in mind there? What road improvements do you foresee?
The only feedback I did receive, because a couple of survey participants emailed me directly, and it was more about, not so much about the roads, but it was mostly about traffic congestion and the lights down at Hilltop and the lights at South Cherry Grove, and synchronizing and coordinate the lights to prevent traffic congestion. The other question I received was about sound barrier walls for people who live in the community, so they don't have to hear the trucks and the machinery all day long and all night long. But I didn't get any direct specific questions about the word roads per se, other than people, well, there was some, and I think Jerry, you had mentioned it. People mentioned sidewalks, extending the sidewalks on Forest Drive. But outside of that, no one said anything else about the roads.
I'd like to point out, in his survey responses, there were a couple of questions that fell outside of the business group. So at the very end of your 20, I think yesterday it was only 26 pages, now it's a bit longer even. There's questions for the staff that we need answered, and then below that there's questions that came up from his survey that really apply to other committees.
Right.
So please take a look at that, especially once you get the final version. I think there's more, Matthew has some that don't really apply to housing, that apply to others, so I'm trying to collect them in that end spot there, just make sure you take a look at that. Thank you, Daryl, that was great, and you're got us on time. Thank
All right.
you.
You're welcome.
Is city employees?
Yeah, mine's over, not to be as long, but I'm just dealing with the employees, what they're seeing going on. The history is that we've been crammed here, crammed there, haven't really had a home in a long time. They're looking at the fact you go to Forest Drive, now we're getting crammed into Forest Drive that looks way too small for what we're going to do. Safety issues and concerns. Now you're bringing more vehicles in. You're going to be working with fire trucks, police cars, so you got less room to move around. And it's just the fact, the history is we were in this building across Spa Road that got torn down, a quarter of it caught on fire, so they crammed them in the front. And half of it was condemned. Then it was torn down and they crammed them into trailers across the street. And then half of it's offices, which I've got some pictures I'm going to be posting. They're cramped in there. You've got a locker room that has 2 bathrooms that women have to walk through. Luckily, we built the wall with the locker so they don't go into the locker room, but they're still got to walk through a locker room. And as I'll show Jackie, you got a refrigerator sitting there and a microwave. There's no way to go place to eat, no place to get out and eat. Weather when it snows. It's just they're looking at it again, employees, downsizing again. We're going to downsize the site instead of building this nice facility. Not that other one won't be nice, but, and then they're pulling the plug. They're ready to go, tore the building down, we're going to start in the spring. Spring comes, oh no, we're not going to you know, we're looking at other sites. Oh, here we go again. So the morale is so low, I don't think employees, when they see it, they're gonna believe it, you know, it's like, you know, Tinkerbell doesn't exist. And that's the big thing, the safety concerns. It just looks like it's crammed together. And in and out, you know, you're gonna have to get employees in and out, trucks in and out. Where on Spa Road, at least you've got a long footprint where you can cut different entrances for employees, work vehicles, and even the public. The public comes in to pick stuff up. Has issues there. That's about it with us. It's just this cramming. And the perception of the employees is they're downsizing to get rid of some of them. I know that's not, but it's hard to tell an employee that because you keep seeing it going like this. And the efficiency is terrible because we've got to go to 2-3 different places to pick stuff up. You know, and we just don't see it fitting at Forest Drive for the operation. And I think these guys deserve a lot of credit for working on the position they've been working under. And I don't believe any other department in the city would put up with it. No way. And then, you know, not that the fire department don't deserve it, you're building a gym for the fire department in Eastwood. Making the bathrooms larger. Well, they need it. Well, yes, you saw the bathrooms over there. I mean, okay. You know, you got 60 people approximately working out in space, and you got one facility. And you got a ladies' room that, like I said, you gotta walk through basically in the girls' locker room to get to it. I don't care if it's a wall or not. It's just not. It's, like I said, you're not gonna eat in there. I wouldn't. I don't even like going in there. But and there's other departments that we have. Myself, I do the heat and air conditioning. I have no place to work. I just got to hope that I can find a bench somewhere in one of these buildings to work on. I'm throwing stuff away because the containers on Tower Avenue, I'm sorry. You know, they're 2,000 degrees in the summertime and up my electronics. In the wintertime, everything freezes, so in the fall, in the spring, I'm all thrown away because it's no good. I've got 2 little offices that I've got crammed with my stuff, and there's no way, the operation is suffering. I think the citizens are suffering for us not being efficient. And I don't see it, they don't see it, I don't think a lot of people don't see it happening any better over Forest Drive. So, hey, we're for Spa Road. Just makes sense to us as operation.
Any questions for Tom? Tom, did you report?
Sure. So Bill and I had city finances, and I just want to start by saying we defined our scope around 3 central questions. Is the proposed land swap a reasonable deal, yielding a net positive result in terms of finances for the city? And that's not just in terms of one-time cash, but that's actually in terms of the overall operational impacts on a 20-year time horizon. Assuming that the city receives net proceeds from the transaction, does it have a reasonable chance of increasing the impact of those net proceeds by leveraging grants, and if so, what that might look like? And then the third was, does the location of DPW facility, whether it's Spa Road or Forest Drive, affect the cost of operations in a material way? Which obviously helps answer the first question. We have been focused solely on distinguishing costs and have avoided analysis of costs that we've deemed common to both options. And we've spent a lot of time kind of fleshing out which column they fall in. And with the next report, I will give you an update on what we've deemed a cost common to both options, so that way we make sure there's transparency and clarity there. For our analytical framework, we are using a net present value with a 20-year time horizon. For non-construction inflation, we're assuming a rate of 2.5% a year, and for construction-related inflation, we're assuming a 5.1% per year rate. We are awaiting a response from the city on what to use as discount rate, and I think it's important for an apples-to-apples comparison that, you know, our discount rate that we use for this analysis is consistent with what the city uses for financial management and projection. I do want to qualify everything we do by saying we're relying exclusively on information provided by the city or Latera Homes. We're accepting everything as accurate and factually true. we're doing analysis, but just like your auditor, you know, we're accepting management representations. It is reasonable to say that the land transaction would result in one-time net positive proceeds to the city. And I think we are focusing in and closing in on having enough information to determine whether or not the deal is reasonable, and whether or not it is likely that a different method of arriving at a deal would have yielded different results. So there's been some question about competitive process, and whether or not competitive process would yield a better offer. I think we'll be able to opine on that by the next report. When it comes to the cost of remediation, because that's a factor there, you know, remediation at Spa Road, the city right now today is liable for any environmental concerns at Spa Road. So truly the city has to suffer the cost of remediation at the site at some point in time. So the cost is common to both options. The only variable that's really at play is the timing of when the cost is incurred. So if there is an environmental concern to the city, it's our belief that that's a cost to the city no matter which option is selected. And so it's not due much further analysis. When it comes to remediation at Forest Drive, there is potential costs there, but there's a lot left to determine. Still waiting for a lot of information on the grants that we've heard about to do an analysis of the multiplier effect. But just to level set there, what we'll be able to provide is a worst case, base case, and best case scenario on what the net proceeds of the one-time transaction might be able to be multiplied into. One thing that we are waiting on, and this will affect our determination of the reasonableness of the transaction, is at the last meeting, the city said it had once gone through an analysis of available parcels of land that met its requirements. For DPW, we have still not received that. We did receive a response that, it did not appear from the way the response was posed that it was the full analysis. It sounded like the city had done an analysis and identified land parcels throughout the city, and that's one thing that we're waiting on and is material to our determination of whether or not the transaction is reasonable.
Scott, can I jump a second? Well, I saw you reacting, but I couldn't tell if you
Yeah.
were reacting which way.
Yeah, we'll make sure you get that because I provided that, so we'll just send it on.
We should have sent it, if you provided it, then I can't imagine that you didn't get it, but I will say that the task force responsibility is to develop a list of pros and cons, that's not coding language, of each site, not to look at alternative sites.
It's not to look at alternative sites, but that speaks to whether or not the transaction as a non-competitive land swap is reasonable. And so that's the purpose, because one of the things that you would have to look at in a land swap situation, since we're not talking about a cash for land RFP, one of the analysis would be how many other likely bidders would there be within the city's jurisdiction, and I'm assuming that that list would speak to the likely bidders. And those properties were eliminated for various reasons, so it would also further speak to whether or not a competitive process would have yielded a different result.
We would have the same information, the same reasons.
May I? Lynn, prior to your tenure with the city council requested all of the information so we can make a decision.
Right.
And that has to be inclusive of alternatives at whatever level. So we're not going to shut down opportunities for us to gather the information we need. So,
Well, I'm not saying
regardless of what was said or has been said or what the language is, the intent of the council is to gather the data so that we can make a decision. And that might be inclusive of, this is not a best location for either one. So don't do it. Don't do either is an option.
Okay. Hold on. So to be clear,
Not for the data.
to be clear, both representatives said they would provide the information, so we'll get the information. I've seen it, so I thought it was already.
Yeah, I thought it was already provided.
Yeah, and the reason why it was shorter maybe than you expected is there were a whole bunch of sites, but they weren't 3 acres, so they were eliminated, they weren't
So it
consider
may be-
further? So there were three, maybe you saw the 3 sites?
I saw a 3-site list,
Yeah.
and my understanding from the meeting was it was a larger list, so it may be that that was responsible.
Cause I was gonna say, anything that David had provided, we,
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I saw those 3 that were provided, but I think the further question was, you know, what considerations eliminated the ones that weren't provided? Was it size, was it traffic, ingress, egress, what might have been, the reasons for
Okay,
those
well, I thought that was
considerations.
addressed too, but we'll double check and make sure you get all the information that you
And-
need.
I apologize if, I will say the city staff has been very responsive, so I don't mean to imply that they're not.
Yeah.
We sent, and not understanding fully that it was Lynn's very first week when we met, we had our first subcommittee beer right after our task force meeting, and then sent you a 5-page request for information.
Right.
So, they've been plowing through, it's just, some of it we're still waiting details on.
So it's my view to ask whatever you want and
Yep.
post everything we get, but as far as the resolution is clear, that it's not to consider other alternatives. So, but to the extent that the data requests you get can help inform the benefits and detriments, that's the two
thank
words
you,
would
benefits
prefer.
and detriments.
For those 2 sites,
Yes.
great.
Moving on, we go to whether or not there are material differences in the capital costs of construction at one site versus the other. We still need a little bit more information here, but we do know enough about the easements, and we've got an initial estimate for additional design costs at Forest Drive, which can be used to count against those net proceeds from the transaction.
Where did you get that information from? From the site,
So for the responses I have in this category all came from city staff. The most concrete is the additional design costs, where we're estimating between $250,000 and $300,000 for additional design costs.
I mean, how did they come up with that?
I don't have that in front of me,
They
but
said there was no detailed analysis done, but that was their.
Well, it's kind of, sounds to me like a swag.
It was design costs, not construction.
yes.
Because I think that's a significant item that has to be considered, the cost of reciting it, especially listening to Mr. Hankins' comments about not fitting.
Again, just because of staffing for the task force and being volunteers, we have to rely on qualifying all of our analysis, so we're just accepting the report as city staff or the developer is acting true.
This, I think, raises a point, and I don't want to belabor this, but part of the reason we're having difficulty in each of the groups is there's not sufficient information available because the prior planning, quite frankly, has been really lacking. And so we can just say we're gonna accept all of that as a given, or we can challenge it, and I think we have to challenge it where it makes sense to do that.
Well, I think that's a style decision for us to make as a task force rather than each subcommittee deciding and then we have a first.
I think I'm leaving it to each subcommittee to highlight or call out the questions, the responses that you think the council might want to get or dive into. So if you think the council in your report wants to focus on that point and dive into it, please note it in your reports.
Yeah, and I suspect that we will, qualify statements and leave open clarifying questions that should be asked. But to meet the timeline, we have to proceed with the best information we have.
Can I ask a question? I'm not familiar with real estate, so I'm looking at.
Can you speak up a little bit, Al?
Excuse me?
Can you speak up, please?
I'll try, my apologies. The appraisal, well, the offered price of 2.2 million is a little over 10% greater than the appraised values. Is that standard for real estate transactions? I have no idea.
We're still doing a little bit of fact finding on that issue. And to be perfectly candid, I think we're all in a position where we're still doing a little bit of fact finding on all the issues.
We've it's only been 3 weeks since our first meeting.
Yeah.
This is just a check-in, not a final report.
Moving on, whether there are material differences in the operating costs of the DPW facility at Spa Road versus Forest Drive. We have confirmed that if it relocates from Spa Road to Forest Drive, that all functions that are located at Spa Road currently will move with the exclusive exception of the fueling operations. So for the most part, that means operating costs are common to both options, and so we zeroed in our analysis on 2 questions. Whether there are material differences in the cost between maintaining fuel tanks and dispensers on site, the Spa Road option, versus purchasing fuel from a third party, the Forest Drive option. And the second question, whether or not there are material differences in efficiency based on the location of the DPW maintenance facility. Our intent is to use a centroid analysis to do that. We have the purchasing trends. We need to go through what some cost projections would be for purchasing with Forest Drive. We do have to talk about the fuel tanks and the dispensers. We have confirmed that the fuel tanks and the dispensers are at the end of their useful life. They are still operational, but they're at the end of their life expectancy. That being the case, the cost of abandoning them could be deemed common to both options, but we're going to need to drill in a little bit further with the city. Would it be its intent at some point to replace the fuel tanks, the underground fuel tanks that are currently at the Spa Road site, if they were to remain at Spa Road, because that would affect the analysis of the cost there of both of the options.
I have a question on that point, the impact of operations. One of the things we came up with on the traffic committee, one site is centrally located, and you can reach the servicing locations with a greater ease than operating at the periphery. In fact, there was some, Nestor brought up, or somebody on the committee brought up the fact that by moving the site to the edge of the operational area, it added about 5,000 man hours. 6,000. So that's significant if you haven't looked at that.
No, we've started looking at that.
Yeah, I think that was your word, actually.
We asked, we started looking at it. We've asked some questions. City staff responded and did an analysis of additional fuel consumption and time for just moving the fueling operation.
Yeah, I think to Tom's point, it was like 6,000 man hours of transit time.
So you did
That's
that.
up to
That's
fuel,
significant.
which is pretty significant. It's 3 man years.
Yeah. I think there are some flaws in the analysis that need to be looked into, though, because it assumed round trips from one spot, and the reality is you can, through routing, build in some efficiency. So I think it's conservative.
Well, I think that goes back to the point of, the data, you either accept it or you don't, right? If you're gonna accept it, you have to accept their analysis the way it is and not second guess it, or if you're gonna second guess it, we have to second guess all of it. Right?
No,
It can't be a hybrid of that, I don't think.
No, we need to understand. So there wasn't a lot of explanation of analysis, I think is the problem.
Yeah,
that
I'm
we
not
found.
disputing that it probably needs some refinement, but I think part of the challenge that we have, right, is, if you get the data, you can question the data, but we don't have the time to go off and validate it in a meaningful way. So it's either accept it as is, maybe make an asterisk that says this really needs further review. But it's either accept it, make those assumptions, or accept it accordingly or not, right?
And if there's data that you would like to discuss as a subcommittee with city staff that's putting those together, let us know and we'll make them available to you to explain it further.
So 2 points on this. And Scott mentioned the concept of centroid analysis. So a centroid is what would the trips be? Right now you're treating Spa Road is physically, that's the place where people do fueling, so you have the data on what the reality is now. The centroid would be the most efficient place for it to be, right? And so the difference really would be, if we move to Forest Drive, would be a comparison of 2 differences, a comparison of where it is now versus the ideal centroid, and then comparing that with, well, what if it was at Forest Drive versus the same centroid? Now, we haven't seen that centroid analysis, and that, I think that would be kind of beyond the expected scope of what the task force could do. But if you could go to that, if you could do an analysis of, okay, where are they, because you have history of service locations, maybe we could do a centroid analysis. We're willing to do that, but we might be taking diminishing returns on the level of effort.
We're
Bring it
waiting
up.
for your
So
team
the
at this
final
time.
point on this is, there's a logical sub-option that I'd like permission to. So in terms of options, there is the logical option of staying at Spa Drive, but farming out the fueling, since you gotta abandon those tanks anyway. So a logical sub-option, if you will, is, we'll look at it, is, well, what if you stay at Spa Drive, you don't get the swap, but you move the fueling options, and then it changes, it's a significant cost difference. So if you will, we would take that as a sub-option.
I think you should discuss it in your committee whether you want to.
That's
pursue
what,
it or not.
does that make sense to you, that we would do that?
I think making a subcommittee decision, when talking with David, I'll give it.
So the only thing that remains are the cost of maintaining Williams Wayland Field is a cost dependent upon the decision to stay at Spa Road. And then we're looking at the net cost of community services. So what we're doing there is we're taking the estimated tax revenue for both sites as developed, and then factoring out the incremental cost of increased police, fire, and other city services that are basically provided. There's a number of ratios that have been developed by policy experts in land planning and use area to apply to tax revenue to generate the incremental cost. We'll use various ones just to show what that may look like. But the reality is adding housing inventory comes with a cost, not just additional tax revenue renewals. High level, it does look like the transaction in terms of one-time cash, even net of those additional expenses, will be positive for the city. I think where there's room for that to change is as you look at the 20-year horizon, when you start to factor in those long-term operational costs. Hopefully by the next report, we'll have that zeroed down.
Is that everything, Scott?
That's everything.
All right, that was a lot, so thank you. I'm going to not ask if anyone has questions now, because we need to move on to Kathy, but if we have more time at the end, we can come back to questions.
Okay, so the community subcommittee, we met twice on August 2nd and August 9th, and the purpose of our committee is to assess the quality of life impact that the two proposed locations would have on residents in wards 1, 4, and 5. And we did have representatives from all the wards or meetings that participated in our conversations. So in talking about this and reviewing this, what became readily apparent is that many of the potential benefits were very difficult to assess because it was very unclear whether or not they truly were viable options. And that was very important to understand, because I think as this has been discussed in the community and with community members, it has been done so within the context of this entire big package, right? That we would be able to make this land swap, and in doing that, there would be certain benefits that would go along with making the swap. So for that reason, we really wanted to call out those benefits that could not be analyzed or assessed due to lack of information. And so specifically, and most importantly, the pedestrian and bicycle bridges over Spa Road and Forest Drive have been talked about numerous times. To date, the information we're lacking on that is, a listing of what the source of funds would be for construction of those bridges, presumably through grants, but we're not clear about what those potential grants are, what is the plan to request them, what's the timing for receipt, what's the likelihood of receipt, and then also discussion about information. Has the city met with the county who owns Forest Drive, and are they amenable to such bridges? Have engineers been consulted about whether or not structurally possible, et cetera, et cetera. So for those reasons, we're sort of putting that to the side. Similarly, enhancements of the American Legion has been talked about as a potential benefit, but again, we feel like that lacks information to really seriously consider at this time. There's no agreement has yet been reached with the American Legion as far as we understand, and so understanding what enhancements could be completed and at what cost has not been made clear. Similarly, in the talk about a park along Spa Road, creating a new park there hasn't been a description of what that would look like, what the cost would be, source of funds. So with saying all that, what we did put together was a very preliminary outline of the benefits and detriments of both locations, but
I do want to emphasize that what we have not done yet, unlike the business subcommittee, is reach out to other community stakeholders, and we really want to have the chance to do that. You know, we did have had good representation of subcommittee, but there certainly are others that we feel is very important that we need to reach out to. And so before finalizing this list, we want a chance to be able to do that. In terms of the proposed Forest Drive location, so, you know, the benefit there is, you know, certainly there'd be a benefit to the Spa Road site in that the Spa Road presumably would have some nice new homes, and it would, you know, perhaps enhance sort of the gateway into the West Street corridor. As Jared mentioned, we did include in our report a couple of other benefits that now when I'm reading it through, perhaps really belong with another subcommittee, for example, you know, that building the homes would put more revenue on the city tax rolls, and that's important to consider, but perhaps it belongs with Scott's group, as well as some environmental considerations that perhaps go with environmental. The detriments to the Forest Drive location, they are numerous. We've listed quite a few of them. First off, having a commercial industrial use facility, you know, built right there adjacent to, you know, several homes in the area, obviously is going to have a negative impact on the home values in the area. And most notably, the Homes at the Glen, which is directly adjacent and would be directly behind where this would be located, is a first-time home buyer affordable community where the residents are just now purchasing homes, and in fact, several of the homes that have been purchased will be literally right behind this facility, and obviously they will have a negative impact on their home value. And I think that's important to point out and understand. Locating the facility along or adjacent to really what is sort of a nestle of low-income communities with our affordable housing lease purchase community, and then behind it Woodside Gardens and Newtown Road, frankly, it perpetuates a long-standing pattern that we all understand and we all know that the city has had with locating low-income communities in the outskirts of Annapolis, and you know, taking action that can lessen the desirability of those areas. And I think as we're considering that, we need to keep that in mind as well. I think that's important. Obviously, having a tall industrial building, we weren't sure exactly what the size of this thing would be, but it looked pretty tall on our drawings. We feel like it would be architecturally inconsistent with the surrounding area. And that, obviously, as a resident, as you're driving through, that's going to decrease the aesthetic area in which you live. Obviously, I think most people, when they think about the Forest Drive location, what immediately comes to mind is traffic. So having 105 public work vehicles, 75 employee vehicles, and all the vehicles that go along with this are going to impact residents' commute times. You know, everybody that has to access Forest Drive to come and go from work will be affected, and that too will have an impact on the value of the homes on Forest Drive. Construction of the facility on Forest Drive will take more time. You know, obviously we talked about that the Spa Road site is designed, ready to go. In fact, they have permits at hand, and so going to Forest Drive, one of the detriments, it's going to extend the time with which it can be completed. And you know, it also creates a nuisance for the nearby residents for the 24/7 operations. And then we also talked about that it would enable the extension of the Skipper's Lane, which that was sort of an interesting conversation we had in our subcommittee, because it is true that that extension is very controversial. So some folks could really take exception to that being completed or facilitated by this. In terms of being on Spa Road location, so the benefit to that is that the Forest Drive location obviously would remain unharmed in the way that we just mentioned. The new facility would improve the appearance of the existing site, and hopefully, you know, the aesthetics of the surrounding area and the neighborhood. It also would enable the facility to be completed quickly. The detriments are, you know, it retains an institutional, commercial, industrial use facility, you know, at that location, proximate to the residents in the neighborhoods in the area. It retains you know, the 105 public work vehicles and 75 employee vehicles, and, you know, proximate to the neighborhoods in that area as well. And it retains the 24/7 operations that I'm sure is a nuisance, you know, for those residents. So that is our preliminary sort of outline of our benefits and detriments. And as I stated, you know, before we finalize this list, we do want a chance to reach out to others, and there may be some others that we haven't considered, and we may, you know, we may add, we may subtract from this list before it's eventually finalized. Does anybody on the subcommittee have any, Alan, Tom, or Roger, or Minor?
I'd just like to, one problem that I had going through everything is the only drawing of the facility on Forest Drive is in the Latera presentation. Can we accept that as an accurate drawing of what the facility would be like if it was located there?
For the public works facility at Forest?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the best concept study that we've done. So they worked with us to put that together, and it's a joint effort, but it's very conceptual as well.
If I take that drawing and the given dimensions of the parcels on Forest Drive and try to back out, you know, some distances, I come up with the rear of the parking about 20 feet from the homes and the Glen that back onto there. That doesn't seem like a very good buffer to me for a facility like that right next to people's homes.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think the concept always was that there would be a sound wall back there.
How much space does you require for your sound wall?
That's not part of the proposal at the moment.
That just adds ugliness. You're replacing noise for one kind of ugly with another kind. I mean, the sound wall would have to be to the height of those dwellings. So these people are gonna come out, and there's a little green area behind them, and then they're gonna be looking at a 30-foot high concrete wall, or 20 feet high. I mean, that, you know.
Yeah, how far can you go with the sound wall to make it aesthetically pleasing? You know, we could use split face block or something like that, but it's still gonna be a wall.
Well, yeah, so
That's
to
a
me,
major detriment.
That's something that should have been pointed out. It's not in the plan. There's no discussion of a sound wall. And it certainly, at least from the people living there's point of view, would be a negative.
Listed in at the end, in the major questions that are remain unanswered, the sound wall questions are listed in there. As we get more information on the cost, who funded it, any details about the sound wall.
And I'm sure that's something that we would have to work with the neighborhood on, if that option is chosen, but to see if they prefer the noise or prefer the wall.
Or prefer nothing.
That's the city that don't feel what they have now.
Can I ask a question for you? Similar to how finance is separating out common costs, the common nuisances, it sounds like you're emphasizing for Forest Drive, and then you listed them for Spa Road. I'm not sure if the community types are different or the distances are different.
Yeah, I think the idea there was we were you know, sort of contemplating that. Unfortunately, the Spa Road location has that now, so there'd be no change, right? Whereas moving into Forest Drive, that would result in a change. So that's why we were.
But the change there would be the equal benefit to the Spa Road residences, right?
Right. Yeah, that's true.
We don't necessarily need a full answer here, but just think about that as you're moving on.
Yeah, except the detriments would be different, right? Because it would negatively change Forest Drive, whereas there would not be a negative change on Spa Road.
It would be an improvement to Spa if you move to Forest.
I do think it speaks to a methodology issue that we need to resolve, or else there will be imbalance in the way the subcommittee's report. We either have to treat both options as equal options, so we're in a neutral position choosing between, or we choose to treat Spa Road as default and evaluate a change to Forest Drive. And that's a very different way of looking at it. And I think you probably see it in the way things are presented. So if you look at things and a neutral stance where you could go with either and you treat them as equal options, it implies something different than when you look at status quo versus a change.
I think that's a good.
That was my opening question. Well, only better articulated.
Captain, can I ask you a question? You said on Skipper's Lane, you know, extended the street on Skipper's Lane is controversial, but you didn't talk a lot about, you know, what were some of the bigger issues with the residents on Skipper's Lane? Are they worried about home values, or noise, or what?
Well, I think the idea of extending Skipper's Lane has always been talked about in the context of more development along Forest Drive, and that would have to be done in order for that development, it would facilitate that development, put it that way. And I think that's what I meant by controversy.
And the other question is, the residents directly behind where the new site would be on Forest Drive. What about, I get noise. What about lights? Will that building be constantly lit and you can't keep your windows open at night, or you gotta buy those? What would the lighting look like?
Normally there would be security lights at night. We don't normally operate at night. We only operate at night if there's an emergency, whether the water main break or sewer break or snow emergency. But otherwise, we don't operate at night, so it would just be security lighting.
Okay.
It's normal that you have on a business.
I'm gonna say something since I'm in the neighborhood that's affected by it now, and maybe the disadvantage, we don't see the public works as a bad neighbor. And so maybe I should have been more vocal about bringing up these negatives of having it there. But as far as the noise, it's not a big problem. These are not trucks, lots of loud trucks operating 24 hours a day. They're in there very early. The whole, I don't know, 175 vehicles. There's no way there are that many employee cars that could park there now. There's a handful of cars. I mean, granted, it's downsized over the years, but I've lived there since it was fully operational. I've been in the neighborhood 25 years on that. But I think that's probably where, I mean, coming from, our neighborhood is not adamant that we should not have the public works in our neighborhood.
Well, right now, you're running at half speed there, because utilities is another.
Well, but I am saying, I mean, I have been, my bedroom window looks out on.
Right, you're not.
I hear you guys.
Close to other houses there as there are on the other property.
Well, the distance is further, however, we're on a hillside and it's on a hillside.
Yeah,
So the sound carries much more than it would on two flat areas. So it's.
Not sure about that.
Oh, no, well, when you have open air as opposed to the flat ground with, I mean, there's some trees on the current site, we've got trees on the site. But when you're at higher locations, sound doesn't follow the land, it goes direct.
Yeah, just as another data point, a couple of years ago when we were getting ready to build and we went in for the permits and we had to get a special exception permit to rebuild there because the zoning is housing, so we had to get a special exception. So it was a public hearing, and there weren't not one single person that came out and complained about the noise there or the operations. And that was really the neighborhood's chance to come in and say, whoa, we don't like public works, you shouldn't be building here again. That just didn't happen.
Well,
So
that
again,
point
just
also,
saying
we
that
had
all.
full staff there too, correct?
Pardon?
We had full staff at that location at that point too.
Well,
Utilities
was not there at that time.
Okay,
just 2 years ago.
I think I was the only one
We're
that
talking
spoke
very
about
You
the
did
lighting.
about the lights, yeah, about one exterior light.
Chair, I forgot I wanted to
Okay.
say. So, what I meant to say, I failed to mention this, so, in our discussions with what we perceive to be a substantial lack of information about some really important aspects of what's being proposed, our subcommittee talked about, in fact, we're recommending that the task force amend its schedule to take full advantage of the time allotted with the resolution, which would give the city 16 more days, is what we're kind of estimating, to collect information and, get back to us with some information so that we can then, sort of make some conclusions and better determinations, so.
And I would just like to add to that, just listening to the discussion here today, as we work across the committees, would also give us, both at the subcommittee level and at the task force level, the opportunity to really get into the report. We haven't even touched that yet today. I think it's very aggressive, the schedule that you have laid out. I don't think it's a reasonable schedule, given the degree and the importance of this. If we're gonna develop something that's meaningful, that the council can use, I think we, quite frankly, need every bit of the 6 months.
I'd agree. I mean, just looking at the finance report, everything we're gonna do is either going to be heavily qualified or have a lingering question just to meet the timelines. And I think it's possible to zoom in on some of these issues if we take advantage of the timeline that the resolution allows. But there's a lot of open-ended or qualified statements as of right now. I don't know.
If there were questions that were posed that David or Lynn said, we need 30 days to answer this question, I would see the merit to that. But I've yet to see a question that they either couldn't answer or could answer with an extra 2 months.
So, well, respectfully, I'm gonna disagree. I sent, within 3 days of our meeting, the 5-page request.
Right.
This week I sent through, and I marked off those that were resolved and those that have still not been responded to. So there are questions that are taking close to 30 days to get a response to. And it took a while. It was a big request, and city staff had to get through it, and they have other jobs as well. But I think that our history, what we're seeing so far, is showing that we need the time.
Well,
And sometimes the answers are not fulsome enough to make useful work.
That's being kind.
I would also suggest that the question that was posited a minute ago was probably the appropriate one. At the moment, sort of, I think all of our committees are looking at the benefits and detriments to two facilities. I think, from my perspective, we're not for a proposal that came from somewhere. There's already a decision made about what to do with public works. So the only real question for me is this a better option? Through this proposal that exists, is that a better option than the option we're already pursuing? Which means you don't do the analysis on that. You only do the analysis on the change. Now, obviously, there's some that you have to do because you have to assess whether or not, the traffic's gonna be just as bad there as it's gonna be over here. But we could sort of go down the rabbit hole of sort of trying to really understand Spa Road in a way, instead of just accepting that that's the default, accepted, approved path forward. And the only reason we're even here is because Parachuted in came a proposal to make land spot.
Yeah, I listened to Tom talking about how these decisions just get punted, and I think it's our responsibility to get to a decision as quickly as possible.
Agreed.
So that the council can make a decision as quickly as possible, so that they can get started on whatever's gonna solve.
Agreed, but I would go back and sort of suggest council made that decision. Now they're being asked to change that decision based on a proposal. So what we should be doing is providing them the information about whether or not that proposal is a better decision than the one they already made. Right, and that should take less time.
Didn't quite follow it again there.
The original timeline was 6 months. That's what he said.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the council made a decision to move forward with the Spa Road facility. It's funded, plan in place, drawings done, permits pulled, public hearings, everything happened for the city to move forward there. But for a proposal, that construction would be underway now.
Yeah, and then Alderwoman Mason can talk about this more specifically if I get this wrong, but my understanding is the council actually was making a decision to go to Forest Drive, and then this proposal to delay that decision is what stopped it. So the default was building at Forest Drive, and Alderwoman Mason said, hold on, let's do this task force, make a decision. If we punt to January and revise the schedule, we all know what schedules get like in the latter half of November and throughout all of December. I don't see.
I'm not suggesting you extend your schedule.
Yeah, okay, thank you, appreciate that.
I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm suggesting that if we get bogged down into trying to do a in-depth evaluation of both sites and try and say which one is better, it's gonna take more time. And if we focus on, this is approved and ready to go, so let's just look at that alternative, then we can meet that schedule. We should be able to meet it without question.
I think Joel is speaking to the original decision to build the public works facility that David was referencing. We had the public hearing, when we had the plans, that was the original decision. On top of that original decision that was made several years ago, including the funding, was this other proposal, was Tom's proposal. So that's the difference. And during this past year's, or this year's budget proceedings, absolutely right, the finance committee moved to put the public works facility back at Spa Road. The mayor's proposal, of course, that was in the capital improvement plan was the land swap, okay? And yes, in order to give us an opportunity to better evaluate the two options, I proposed the task force, okay? But it is absolutely correct that our original plan, and you may have been on the council when that decision was made, to put public works back where it is today.
Yes, that's not the most recent decision.
Well, there is no most
There is
recent
no
decision.
There's no other decision.
There's no other decision.
Right, so,
There was until the task force stopped it.
exactly, exactly.
Well, it wasn't voted.
We did vote unanimously, this task force.
Yes,
would-
but there wasn't a decision made at the last council meeting to move it to Forest Drive. That's what I think Jared
No,
said.
no, there was no decision, there was no vote. The vote that was taken was on the resolution to create the
The
task
task
force.
force, that's correct.
And given 6 months. And I know you're concerned about the timeline. And may I just suggest that you move forward, if you need more time, you have it, if you don't need it, you don't need it. But I would like for the committee members to feel as if they're able to give it their all.
So maybe for Lynn and David, as you're giving answers or perhaps responding to questions that have not yet been answered, maybe you can give us not this moment, but give us a time frame for how long you need to answer.
So there were a few questions from the finance subcommittee that we needed both the mayor and the chief of staff in the same room to answer, and the chief of staff has been on vacation for 2 weeks.
From the
So-
finance committee, you said?
From the finance subcommittee.
Oh,
Finance
okay.
subcommittee.
Something.
And so we have not answered, there's a block of questions that we have not answered from them. I will say that several of the committees have asked about grants and grant funding that would be available, and I'm cautious to put that kind of information out there because it would be completely speculative. Because we don't know what grants will be available at the time, how much funding will be available through those grants, if any at all. They would be competitive, so we would have to wait. We wouldn't know whether we would get an award or not. And so to make a decision based on what grants might be available, it would still be what might be available and what we might get. So it would be purely speculative. I can still make a list, say, Tiger grants pay for blah, 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 but we don't know whether we would get one or not.
I think that's helpful to hear. I think just having a definitive, just like you said, answer like that is helpful to hear, because I think what that tells our subcommittee is then we take the bridges off the table. Then we just pretend like they don't exist. And we, provide that assessment as if the bridges aren't there, because unless you have some degree of certainty, you can't contemplate that it's gonna happen, so.
I don't know that I entirely agree. I mean, we forecast grant revenue all the time. You can't assume 100% win rate. You can't assume 0% win rate. But I mean, you can, with some rationale, speculate a base case, a best case, and a worst case scenario, and at least have a meaningful discussion of this is what it means in a scenario where we don't win much of these. This is a bullish scenario
Yeah,
and
but-
what it means.
See, I think the difference is, unlike, sort of your analysis where you take a little bits and pieces and parts, when it comes to the community and their understanding of what this package entails, without, I mean, I know personally, I've had many conversations, if there's no bridges, no, why would they want it? So I think that the pedestrian bridge, every time it's been talked about, every time the mayor has talked about it or been in a public forum, it's always been within the context of, we'll do this land swap so we can have these benefits. And so I think it is important to understand, how certain or uncertain it is. It's not just a detail in the context of the community.
Has the city discussed, since Forest Drive is a county road, right? Has the city discussed with the county whether they would be in favor of letting them build a pedestrian bridge over Forest Drive?
We've asked that
The
question.
land use group is supposed to get to that, and we haven't finished going through the committee reports, so maybe we should pause this discussion, finish the committee reports. The time's running fast, I know 2 hours seems like a lot, but we're going through this fast. So let's finish the committee reports, and then we have time for discussion. And I think that leaves us with, the next is, Bill standing in for Jesse for environment.
Okay, well, I'm sitting here. Thank you. Yeah, so Jesse and I met right after our meeting. He couldn't make the initial meeting either. I want to tell you, I found Jesse to be really well informed, as well as well connected to the environmental community. I mean, he's informed that, he's a lawyer, he's environmental advocate. Really sharp guy, well connected to the environmental community and the city officials. Jesse's on vacation with his wife and kids in Vermont, so I'll be sitting in. I might not be the best one to answer questions, but I'll do my best. The first page, pretty explanatory, basis of information, background information. Second page, talking about assumptions. Basically, the 4 assumptions listed there, as Jesse gave me permission to mention 2 others. So, assumptions, no immediate substantial increase in vehicular traffic. What we mean by that is in-out traffic, or wherever the facility is. It's not about traffic elsewhere, but this substantial increase, difference in in-out vehicle, no matter where the facility is located. There'd be disturbance of soils, contamination, that no matter where you do this project. The city would, we assume the city would execute a robust and thorough review and inspection and enforcement, I wouldn't say enforcement, inspection and enforcement of stormwater management control facilities, both during construction and after construction. And we assume that Forest Drive eventually is going to be developed by someone. We added those assumptions, unstated assumptions that, with respect to the Forest Drive facility, emissions are always an issue. We talked about, I'll talk more about environmental justice issues, but so emissions with respect to diesel trucks, now the fleet is largely diesel trucks, but the committee's been given to understand the city has intentions, no matter where it moves, or doesn't move, or follows it, that there's an intention to change the fleet over from diesel to natural gas, which could, minimize the, certain kinds of particulate emissions. But that can be, right close to operations, that's where diesel emissions can be an issue, more of an issue. With respect to the wind facility, just a note, we mentioned it earlier in finance as well, but there's a known contamination issue with respect to the wind fuel. Now, what we are assuming here is that that's going to be attenuated, remediated. No matter what,
please.
So, no matter what that happens in the future, wherever the site is located, whether the DPW stays at SPA or moves, that's going to be remediated. There's a potential timing issue. There's imperative that it be done if there's going to be a landslide. So those are the kind of underlying assumptions. Then looking at we looked at the environmental concerns, and what popped out was that the primary areas of consideration for environmental trade-offs has to do with stormwater management during that construction, with contamination of soils underlying Queens Whalen Field, and environmental justice concerns. And there's a fourth, potentially, and I made a note that we need to talk perhaps more with Kathy about at the Forest Drive site. You mentioned standing water, and of course there may be wetlands issues there that need remediation. So potentially we need to learn more about that. So those underlying principal concerns. With respect to option one, we know that the option one's, there's staying at spots, options basically staying at Spa Drive. That's a bigger site. So it affords a greater opportunity to implement stormwater management. And at the same time, that's very close to the headwaters. So kind of an early, obvious draft, if you will, recommendation of the subcommittee is that the city would commit to 100%, treat 100% of stormwater, and instead of just 50%. You've committed to 50%, but it would seem logical to commit to 100% stormwater management at that site, given it's so close to the headwaters, and you do have almost 12 acres of land to work with there. With respect to Wingfield and there's again, probably, remediate the site no matter what, but there's a timing issues. If there's gonna be a land swap, then there'd be a real urgency to get remediation done, which is just a timing impact. Stormwater management facilities, again, you're gonna be both before and after, during construction, after construction, we'll be looking to the city to be managing stormwater properly at both sites. There are issues at both sites with respect to the total spending solids. There's impaired, the waters of the state are impaired at both sites with respect to total TSS. So we look for robust stormwater management during construction for both sites. Environmental justice. Now, what the subcommittee notices that there's no one on the task force specifically representing the community there, so we point that out and I would make an early draft recommendation that someone be brought in to the task force for that purpose of representation. I guess an obvious alternative, Jared, you could ask us to reach out to that community for ourselves, much as Daryl did with the survey, to reach out and try to pull in input from.
But I tried to capture that in the questions at the bottom of the report, at the end of the report, whether the community, asking if the community or housing subcommittees will reach out to ACA, Housing Authority for City of Annapolis. I just want to make sure.
We can do that. We can do that. And what I look for, perhaps some folks within the committee can advise us who to reach out to specifically. We'd welcome that.
Well, I'm saying it shouldn't be the environment. It might be as long as housing or community would take that on.
Okay.
Rather than environment.
Coordinate with housing. Okay, we can do that. And that's why I have questions.
Thank you.
There's a lot of data in the reports that you all had. Too much to try to go through, so I just spot checked something. I picked the first metal, arsenic. When I looked up, the MDE limits are 0.68 for residential and 3.0 for non-residential. And for the 8 borings that you had data, they ranged from 4.17 to 67.4. Am I reading that right?
Is it
that bad?
We haven't been getting any of the data that you don't see.
What?
We don't have any data that you don't have.
No, I'm just wondering if I'm reading it wrong. I mean, this sounds like really terrible pollution. Maybe I just happen to pick the one that's an extreme, I don't know.
What the report says is there are exceedances relative to the standards for arsenic.
But these are order of magnitude. I mean, that's huge. You know, we're talking a factor of 20 over the allowable for non-residential and a factor of 100 almost for residential, actually over 100 for residential.
So our inference is that, it's not just an inference, but there will have to be remediation. What we point out is that remediation is going to be necessary regardless of whether a swap takes place. The difference has to do with timing. Just for practical, we'll modify the report to make this clear. Just as a practical matter, the land swap's going to take place. And Tom was very clear, at the opening. He would have to protect himself from liability. So the city would have to do And, you know, the time value of money being what it is, there would be an imperative on both the city and in the case of land swap, where if just land swap were being pursued, there would be an urgency in both the city and the potential private partner would feel an urgency to work with the state agencies and get that done. You have to know not just what the meaning of the numbers are, but what's an appropriate, acceptable to the state authorities remediation thing to be done. And that would have to be timetable worked out and have to be carried out. That urgency doesn't exist if the city continues to, because the issues on Wheatfield Field.
Well, isn't there a difference in cost associated with, I mean, because I used to do landfills back in my prior days. You can cap something and you remediated it where you cut off groundwater into the source, into basically creating a source. You basically cap it, it runs off, you're not basically pushing the plume out.
Yeah.
The difference here is you can cap it, put a ball field on it, but you can't put houses on it without going in and basically excavating.
So-
I think there could be a
So
difference.
just
I
to-
question if there
Just
are
not to
apples.
go down agreed, okay, important thoughts. For the authority that gets to decide what is an acceptable measure is not at the table, it's the state. So if the question gets asked, it gets asked to the state, not to the city, not to us, okay, and they get to decide. So there's a process for that to determine whether or not a cap, or digging, or whatever, what abatement measures, use those terms, you know, are acceptable to the state authority is yet to be decided. And that's something that could happen in time or in time.
I can address some of this either now or later, Jared, it's up to you.
We'll only start with committee reports, so if you could address that at the end of the committee
I can
reports.
speak more to the whole process, very much.
Well, I guess, you know, the issue that I mean, it seems like there'd be a huge difference in the remediation cost for residential construction there as opposed to whatever you call the DPW facility.
Actually, what I would say is there's a difference in source of funds on which to do that. So I'll speak to it in a little bit.
Well, I mean, I did hear Greg's point, that depending upon the remediation, that if it's a bunch of townhouses versus if it's a ball field, it could be very different remediation costs that the city has to incur. And it's a very good point. But
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
looking
like
forward to
in
your.
Anne Arundel County, one of the landfill cells, it was cheaper to take the whole cell out than it was to remediate it. They just basically, years ago, back in the 70s, 75, they had, you know, online thing, that was an issue. They took out, I think it was cell 2, 3, they removed it. So it cost many, many millions of dollars, way beyond the city's budget. So that's something just, again, something to keep in mind.
Well, the bigger issue is the time to act, right? The land swap forces action now versus DPW, which has action at some point into the future, right?
Yeah, and again, with the flash, you don't know. I mean, I don't know how long ago was it flashed? Did somebody actually put a clay cap over it? Don't know.
Thank you, Bill, for standing for Jesse. Kathy Koch is not here, so I don't think we have a housing committee report. I am concerned that we don't have a housing committee report. If you notice, there's nothing submitted by them. I did have one conversation with her, and it was relatively brief, and I think she felt like her input should be brief. Just either you're adding housing is a good thing. Adding housing comes with adding some FPDUs. If you don't add housing, you're not adding FPDUs. That's my report. So that perhaps is why we're not sitting here. So anyway, moving on to land use. I don't think we have Elliot or Phil Hager here. I also do not have a report from them, but I do know that they have been meeting with city staff, and so I am expecting more information as we go forward from land use. So the last person here with a report is Joel.
Yes, and our group sort of spent the first couple of weeks collecting questions and submitting them, and we got answers pretty rapidly. Some which may require additional questions, some which did in fact elicit additional questions. We met together last week to sort of talk through what our process would look like and how we would go about this. And my report, which unfortunately didn't get submitted to Jared in time to make it into the email yesterday, I think, sort of lays out, you know, our stakeholders, you know, being pedestrians, visitors, residents of the community affected on Forest Drive. The ability to sort of understand the speculative nature of the pedestrian bridges is something that we've tried to get some questions and answers around. The questions about service locations and some of the efficiencies in the different sites. As we look at the map, interestingly enough, DPW's current location seems to sit almost immediately at the centroid of the city of Annapolis boundary, which is pretty interesting. So presumably somebody was smart enough to do that for a reason at some point long ago, and makes access to all the city areas. So that the change in that we're trying to figure out how to understand by looking perhaps at service locations. It could be that all the services is down, you know, to the south of Forest Drive, and it might be more efficient that way than coming from Spa Road. We just don't know. There's not any sufficient traffic studies. The best information we have, and we happen to have on the committee, the gentleman that's responsible for the Forest Drive corridor from the county, and I think it's maxed. Right? At the moment, the Forest Drive traffic is maxed, so the idea of putting in some more. We've got a couple of questions about the possibility of making Hilltop and Forest Drive a four-way intersection. That we've been told is completely off the table and did not even be considered as an option. There's some concern about the extension of Skimper Lane, probably less so for the community purposes in our committee, and more so to, I think we talked about it a little bit at the last meeting. At the moment, Skipper Lane dead ends into the proposed parking lot based on the drawing for the DPW at that site. But if it needs to move beyond that into Paradise Point, that would put that would call Providence Point. That would put that parking lot in jeopardy and having to deal with parking in a different way, perhaps vertically, to accommodate and whether or not that is a real possibility. I think the other thing that we're sort of trying to determine by looking at some of the data is trying to project out. The mayor made clear that this was probably a 30 to 50 year plan. Finance guys are looking at it on a 20-year horizon. Is the facility as is described in plan sufficient to meet the 20-year needs of the city? Do we not expect DPW to grow in the next 20 years? Is it not 105 trucks, but 150 trucks? And if that happens, will that site accommodate them? So those are some of the questions we're trying to answer, which deal with the connectivity, which deal with the traffic, and then looking at the recreation, the other sort of things we're trying to understand. There doesn't seem to be an agreement on operational principles or whether or not we could even spend excess funds from a land swap to improve fields on school board property, and who would maintain them going forward. Whether those would be available as true city facilities is a question mark, given that they would only be available after school time, not sort of all day long. Lights was a question, parking was a question, so there's some questions around recreation that I think are unanswered. So our approach is to try and sort of get as much information as we can. What we hope to do at that point is establish a list of assumptions that we've made, and then try and build out a matrix of you know, I sort of identified in my report as red-green, you know, in looking at the sites as one better than the other, because, you know, and in some ways that's comparing one to the other instead of a, you know, pro-con or benefits detriments. It's sort of, you know, taking a look at an individual sort of thing, you know, traffic sort of red or green at one site versus the other, and just look at them in that context. I think in the end, our committee sort of probably believes that there's not now, will there ever be enough, even in an extended schedule timeline, enough information to really accurately make the decision. It would call for, there's been no traffic studies of that region and that we can find anywhere that anybody seems to have. So certainly one would expect that before you undertook such a thing, you would engage a traffic study. So that's something we really wouldn't be able to answer. We can speculate. A lot of the things we're trying to find a way to make them quantitative instead of qualitative. You know, so that they're not the opinion of the committee or stakeholders that we've talked to, but more factual based, and that's going to be a little hard for us to come by in some ways. But that's our intent, is to sort of get the answers to the questions, and the questions that those questions generate, try and distill that down into the core issues that we think are most important, rate the two sites based on those, and provide a list of assumptions that we used in making those determinations.
I got your report this morning, I've included it, so when I send around another draft, you'll see the 4 pages.
Yeah, sorry about that, I was a little confused on that, I guess.
No worries.
I have a question about the fields. These fields are not like the normal school fields, and these are used by the community all day long during the school year. They're not fenced in the way other schools are, so I don't know if that's an agreement the city already has on these fields, but the track's used all day long, as well as the other lower fields.
It poses a problem operationally, only from a safety, as you can imagine, in today's environment. There are concerns with safety knowing the students are out there with teachers. I've been down there before in the SIC community coming out there. As far as using the fields, like I've seen people around the track, they're not really playing ball on the fields. That parking lot, most of it I think is all school board property. If we pose it, basically we think there's an issue, we will fence it off and basically secure it from the public like we do on many of our school sites. At this point, it has been left open.
Is that because the city currently picks up the trash in these parking lots and stuff? So is there not currently an agreement with the city?
We have some unofficial, I mean, the community, basically it's the city uses it. I mean, the field has not been maintained. I think everybody can agree it doesn't get maintained. I mean, that was the purpose of the $1 million grant we had gotten. I hadn't even begun to spend it because we have issues that we need to work out with the city and the Critical Area Commission. We were gonna put a turf field in. Critical Areas is saying that's impervious, and they want us to possibly plant all these trees and create all this stuff, and I'm like, I'm not gonna I'll give the money back because the site is the site, and if I have to plant trees, we'll take away recreational amenities with the school. So I think we've got a long-term issue. I know the concept here was to put three turf fields was the concept that I think I saw. Sounds great. Problem is, there's a regulatory issue with that we need to work out with both the city and the Critical Area Commission to get that to work. If that was to be allowed, one of the things that we normally do when we do turf fields in the county, or we've allowed the county on school board property, usually we put lights with them. And although it costs an extra, say, $500,000 for lights, at least the community can use it, because the schools are basically board that property up until we release them to the public, and usually that might not happen until 5 o'clock at night. In the late fall, it gets dark at 5, and so the fields would not be in use. So we encourage, whenever we have got money for turf fields, always add lights to them. Either high schools, what we have done. So I would foresee that if we're gonna move this project forward, which I know there's a demand in the city for needing additional fields, just because of limited space, I could see us trying to seek money for lights with that. And again, that gets into a community issue. How are they gonna feel with that? So one of my last conversations with the late Speaker Bush was when he gave me the million, I said, what about lights? And he's like, no, we're just gonna do the field. I'm like, okay, fine. But it's one of those things that, adding lights to facilities also changes, extra evening activities, which may not be encouraged.
Extracurricular activities.
Exactly. So it gets into a whole operational, perspective. I mean,
But the liability one as well, I would expect, huh?
yeah, well, again, that's something we would have to work out with the city, like we do with the county, typically any of our fields that are used after hours, we require County Rec and Parks actually has on-site staff people to oversee it. And that was part of the agreement allowing the county to even be on school board property. So that adds operating costs that would have to be factored in that somebody would have to pick up. So there's a lot of things, it sounds good, but there's a lot of things that would have to be worked out between now, the MOUs and everything.
I think the other thing that we focus some attention on, and it probably goes to the land use group as well as ours, is the pedestrian sort of bike structures that are planned don't seem to account for whether that's acquisition or easement, even if you extract the sort of potential for grants and cost and routes, and more important about the routes is, what is it that they're connecting to? So, if you just sort of build a bridge across, what's it connect to on each side of the bridge that makes it a meaningful sort of pedestrian or bicycle overpass? There doesn't seem to be a clear idea of what that is or how that works. Maybe more clear actually on Spa Road than on Forest Drive.
Yeah, I mean, the city has a bike ped master plan that was approved in 2011 that called for quite an extensive network through the city. But relatively little of it has actually been built. And yeah, Joel's point is right on, which is the bridges, part of the value is in what they cross, the zero by Forest Drive, but more of the value is in what they connect to, so that people actually have a place they can reach when they get from one side to the other. And so looking at the bridges in the context of an overall network is really important.
And if it costs $4 million to cross over a road, it might be better to take the $4 million and build the trails and then cross at a signalized intersection. I think what we have currently on Hilltop.
Yeah, but it's a.
That's not budget, South Cherry Road.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, again,
Plus than that.
that's a part of the dream, I guess. But.
There's numbers in the package, there's less than that.
Oh, it's less than 4.
I feel like you made a very significant statement when you said that the four-way stop can't happen.
Yeah.
That's important for the community to understand that, because that means that, a lot of traffic will be going on South Cherry Road. How do you know that? Did you meet with the?
People that own that road said it ain't happening.
There's previous development coming through of that, and then basically because it's a county road, that signal is one of the point that comes in and out, the city of Annapolis into the peninsula. We said it's not gonna be a full lane. We consider in and out, right in and right out, but not a full intersection.
I think that really needs to be bubbled up and everyone understanding, because again, when this is explained in public, I think, people will think about having this four-way stop, and if that's not possible, we need to be very, very clear about that.
I will say, to be fair though, neither Tom's plan or the mayor's plan called for that to be a four-way intersection.
Well, I did speak to that in my proposal.
Yeah, you did say that.
And I'm curious, was that backed by, is that policy or is that a traffic study that is determined?
It's a policy and traffic study. We
Okay.
did a simulation, the one that you referred to, Ken Schmid did for the city. We made comments and said, it's not happening.
Well, I saw the comments, it didn't, in my read of it, didn't say that it's not happening, you just said address these different items. And that was for a senior facility that was not a public works facility, obviously, but the conclusion, I think you would agree, the conclusion, at least by Ken Schmid, was that the fourth lane would not deteriorate the
And the
condition.
conclusion is that the county right now stands is not a full.
Okay, so there's a policy decision,
Correct.
okay.
So, and I think there's an important point from that, because if you look at where vehicles are gonna have to go, the majority of them coming out of the Forest Drive facility will probably go on to Spa Road or Hilltop and then Spa Road or continue on Hilltop, just looking at the map. So basically, putting it on Forest Drive shuttles these through a neighborhood, the trucks, onto Forest Drive, which is at capacity, and then onto Hilltop, and then Spa Road, which is completely avoided. Is that a comment?
I
couldn't find my purse.
Everybody's getting called Sheila now. Look, we've got 17 minutes left. We want to give some time to Tom and David, but let's do the quick version because I know we want to give some comments about the report before we finalize that.
It's pretty thick.
What's it?
Do you want to? Okay, well, then I'll just go ahead and maybe just address some things. Do you mind if I stand up? I've got,
Go right ahead.
I'm a runner and my legs get a little cramped up.
There's a walker if you need.
Yeah, I might need the walker. I'll try to go through some of the questions that I jotted down, but I would encourage that some things that I hear made it almost sound like maybe some parts of my proposal weren't quite read clearly. I know it was kind of a little bit voluminous. There was a lot of detail in there, but there were some pieces in it that I think that are really important for everyone to understand. That some which didn't come out here today. I want to start with the environmental because that was some of the larger discussion here. I need everybody to understand that the current proposal, I was actually surprised that the actual work area of Spa Road is only a 2.5 acre piece at the very front of the property. It does not extend back along Spa Creek. It does not extend to the what I would call the dump yard, work yard, that sits right adjacent to the creek. You look puzzled like you didn't know that. The reason is because during the special exception hearing, it was declared that all of that was going to be remediated, new stormwater management, everything was going to be upgraded. And that was the premise on which the special exception was granted. Later on, when it got into design and budget issues and the cost of putting stormwater management facilities in on this work yard that literally lies within feet of the waters of Spa Creek with storm drains that you can see in my picture that flow into Spa Creek, those will remain untouched in the Spa Road Public Works Reconstruction Plan for the foreseeable future because there's no source of money to remediate that. Over 3 acres of asphalt will stay untreated, not 50%, not 150%, but 0% treatment. 3 acres of asphalt. To me, I don't know the legal standing of whether or not this special exception being granted under the guise that the whole thing would be remediated creates an issue, but I know as a developer I would sue if I said I'm going to treat the whole site and I'm going to upgrade all my stormwater management facilities and then only did a fraction of that. I wouldn't be able to do it. So I mean, maybe I don't know all the loopholes, but I think everybody needs to understand that 3 acres of asphalt will remain unremediated and will dump directly into Spa Creek as it is today. That's significant.
Just a little question.
Yeah.
Because I know that's the access point down to that pump station that you guys use, and isn't that your
A couple
your
things
graveyard
about that.
down there?
First of all, it's not 3 acres of asphalt, so maybe at most 1 acre, and so that's phase 2. So what happened was when this project was funded, it was funded, I think about in FY12. And then we messed around with this for a long time and looked at other sites, and finally we got it all designed in FY16. So we were ready to move forward. We got all the pricing, and we didn't have enough of that FY12 money because of inflation to do the full project, the full program. So there's a phase 2 to this project, and Tom's aware of that because we have a full design for both phases, but all we could afford with the first phase was the front part, which is the most necessary, but we clearly need the back part because that's all of our storage facilities back there.
But there's no funding for it, and there's no permits for it.
But yeah, that's gonna have to go
But can we
back
get back to the
council.
size, because you said the front's only about 2.5, 3 acres.
Yeah, it's
Is
actually-
the Forest Drive site only about 3 acres, am I thinking? And I guess the
3.5
question is.
acres in total, and this is.
But for Public Works to operate a yard, you have the front half, and then you always need the back half, which you have all the slop piles, you've got the good clean fill, when you have a water main break.
Just what you said there though, the slop
Oh, I
pile is
totally
going to
agree.
remain running into Spa Creek, and with all due respect, the city has no money to identify.
But to operate a Public Works facility,
Yeah.
you still need that laydown area to handle all that equipment. And that's the only question I have is where's the other 3 acres that he's gonna be able to have a, when you have a water main break or a sewer main break, you have that slopping material, you've gotta dump it, let it dewater before you can do anything with it. And again, you can use stormwater controls and come up with oil grit separators and.
I would
filters
take a tour of that yard to see
I've
what's
been
gonna stay
down.
there.
Again, I was there when they did the headwater
Yeah.
stormwater management.
I mean, it cannot, it's unconscionable for the city to allow that to not be remediated in this new plan. It's just, there's no other way around it. As a citizen, it's outrageous and with all due respect, I did a takeoff of 3 acres of asphalt that includes the east side, rather the west side of the property. There's 1.85 acres of asphalt on the east side and or 1.85 on the west side. Yeah, well, it's.
I mean, that's not what this.
I mean, I can provide, it just
It
gets me, anxious because I realize that under this reconstruction plan, so much of this stuff that runs into the creek is gonna remain running into the creek.
I'm confused now, later. Where does this slop yard and everything else fit in at the Forest Drive site?
It's accounted for, and I assume that it's in the 3 acre requirement that the city came up with in its search for alternative sites, that you needed 3 acres, and so it's satisfied.
Is it shown on that drawing?
It's just, not specifically, not explicitly. It's the work area that's on the I guess the south part of the site. There's a whole row of material storage bins. It's in that area.
The other thing is about the contamination up on Weemswell Field. So there's a lot of discussion about that as well. That also is ending up in Spa Creek. You know, it's a porous field, right? If there's contamination under the ground, logic will tell you that the rain goes in one direction and it leaches through the ground right into Spa Creek. Again,
that's conjecture, just for sake of clearness.
Yeah.
There's no proof of that.
Well, there's all, yeah, I mean, there's proof that exists.
Did the test so that it's tightly bound to the material that's underground.
Jared, I have a point of order question. Are you gonna be holding us to the 4 o'clock stop time? Because if so, I really feel like we need time to discuss next steps with submission of this report, especially given it sounds like you're gonna be away, and you may be unavailable, yeah.
Right, so, excellent question. First of all, show of hands, who cannot stay till 4:10? Okay. So, okay, everyone else can stay to 4:10. So let's give them 5 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes minus Nestor. Is that okay with everybody? You okay with that? Let's continue that discussion for 10 minutes.
Then I'll try to be brief and keep my passions muted. I think it's very important to consider the cleanup of the Weemswell Field, whether or not, and it is conjecture how much goes into the creek. I'm just using logic to say if there's contamination there and there's water flowing through it, something is going to be picked up there. Under the proposed plan, that fly ash that is existing there it needs structural, what we call a structural bridge placed over the top of it, which means that I need to bring in clean structural fill material on top of what's there and compact it so that I can build houses over the top of it. Part of that can contain, as Greg was alluding to, could be and now this is where it comes into working with MDE on exactly what this remediation looks like, but part of it could be a clay cap that goes down first before the structural fill goes over the top of it, before the houses get put up on top of it. It can be more of a fabric if that were required, although there's no volatile organic compounds, meaning there's not really any issues of fumes coming up, so typically a vapor barrier would be required if there were fumes coming off of whatever's contaminated. So the housing can go on top of contaminated soil once it's capped and remediated like that. I've done many sites that have had significant remediation, even more than this required, as recently as 285 West Street, which had a dry cleaner on it for many, many years that had volatile organics and all kinds of things. We ended up capping that site. It's under construction right now. So there is a source for cleaning that up under the proposed redevelopment plan. I question whether there's a source for cleaning it up and what's the urgency if it doesn't, if the reconstruction happens on Spa Road and, there's really no source of funds to cap and take care of that site that I'm aware of. So I think that's a significant issue. Environmentally, it causes me great concern about leaving everything there in its place.
So accepting all that though, as we sit here today with your proposal, we really have no idea what the extent of remediation would be required, whether it would be approved or not approved for your development to go forward, correct?
Well, it's gonna take, working through MDE, yes, but it's certainly, there's nothing there, and you can get outside opinions on this. And I've spoken to my environmental person who had done my other cleanups. There's nothing there that says, oh my God, you've got such a problem that no, we'll do what we always do. We sit down with MDE, we're gonna propose our remediation plan. She said, sounds like it's probably a clay cap. We'll give them information. They'll come back and they'll say, no, we wanted 8 inches instead of 6 inches or something like that. And there's a process that goes through. So no, there's no approved plan in place. There's no way the committee can extend until that plan is approved because it's gonna be, a year before.
So assess the risk of a plan not being either approved or continuing to be financially viable that's not discovered for 6 months or 9 months. What's the risk assessment against that from your perspective?
Well, I think the risk assessment is that there is a value to the Spa Road site, and whether it's more or less of net funds at the end of the day after the remediation is what's at risk. But I think you could get professional opinions to say that it's not going to be greater than the value realized for this proposed swap.
Would you indemnify the city?
Of course not. No, the city, there's a voluntary, a VCP, a voluntary cleanup program that the state has created that I have participated in on numerous other sites. Once, the city will never be inculpable once they contaminated the site years and years and years ago. They will always be the culpable party.
Well, the only issue is if somebody all of a sudden drops 42 homes on it and they have to go back and remediate it 10 years, 20 years from now, how are you gonna do that? Because then all of a sudden the cost for remediation, you've now created to me, a liability by putting these homes there because there's no way to get in there economically and remediate it. If they had to do it again, if they're gonna be held liable.
They won't be held liable for the program that the state has approved and will monitor installing the remediation. So that system, if it's approved in place, I don't believe that the city has responsibility for that because I'll be the one installing it.
Based on your experience, then, what would you estimate the cost of remediation to be? You said you've done something.
See, the unique situation here is I've got to bring in, call it 18 to 24 inches of fill anyway, to put on top of the soil that needs to be structural, that's not currently structural. So I've got to bring in clean dirt regardless. So the question is, what's the incremental cost of a piece of that being a clay cap versus just regular structural fill? I don't have a number. I could try to put something like that on it, but it's not, it's under $500,000. I would, if I were to venture a guess, I would say it's under $500,000.
And so
the cost of the remediation on a site smaller than that, on Spa Road, which is about, I think it was about a little over 2 acres, was about $75,000.
And so naively trying to visualize what you're talking about, so the homes that you would build would not have basements?
They're not planning to have basements, no. Yeah.
What about a time?
We've got a time crunch.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Tom's available for committee meetings, so
Okay.
if your committee wants to invite him in, I imagine you guys can come up with a schedule and ask a lot more questions. It's a healthy discussion. I'm sorry to cut off. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and to Kathy's point, I don't want to be able to more discuss.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, the proposal is actually on the task force website. I'd be happy to send it to you directly.
I gave you the link yesterday. So the report, my goal was to truly just lightly edit just for flow, but not change any content, and I plan to continue doing that, so whatever you guys want to put in your committee reports, it's still there now and still be there. I did do a summary at the end of questions, just for timing, as we had time to think, I had time to think about this. My thought process is this. Rather than rush final draft of this tomorrow, why don't I give everybody, we'll see how this conversation goes in 10, 15 minutes, but noon tomorrow to get any edits to the draft. I will then, by the end of the day tomorrow, send out another draft that everybody can make additional comments to, and then get those back to me by Monday. And then Tuesday, I'll incorporate those comments on Tuesday. So a week from today, send out this final version to the city, and so built in a little bit more time.
From today?
Yeah, so I'll say that again. So
Tomorrow
tomorrow,
to comment on your.
tomorrow the 14th, noon, comments to draft. I will return it back to everybody by, also tomorrow, by 5 p.m. I'll send next draft. And then give you that a few days to mull over, get me comments. I won't be doing anything over them this particular weekend. So Monday, what's Monday's date, anybody? 19th. So say by August 19th, get me more comments, if any, or sign off. Hopefully it's a few sign offs at that point. I will incorporate whatever comments I get, and hopefully be able to send a final out to the mayor and city council and of course staff.
May I ask
By
Jerry,
on the
you said
20th.
send a final out? This is a preliminary report, right?
That's all it is. It's a
Okay.
preliminary report.
Would you please make it in big letters so that my colleagues will realize it's a preliminary
Yes.
report? I don't want them to think that this is the end of.
You had Mark draft pretty well, I think.
Can we clarify, the recipients of the report? So will be the public or just the council and staff?
I think anytime you go, all this is going to the public. So it's mayor, city council, of course, all the staff that cares to, everyone in the mayor's office, and it'll be posted online, so it'll be absolutely public. Yeah. And it is just that, it's just a interim report. It's frankly, I thought it would be useful to get something to the ultimate recipients of reports. Say, this is where we are today. If you think we're off track, or we need to dive more in, or anything else, this is your chance to check in, so that it's not they only get one report at the end and say, wait a minute, you didn't do what we wanted you to do. So it's a check-in. That's all it is. Scott, we're good about that.
Jared, what date did you say that would happen?
So assuming this works, the 20th is where I ended up.
By the next day, after?
Yeah, well, yeah, because we're getting comments already
Comments and
tomorrow.
sign off?
We're getting a second round of comments after that till Monday.
Okay.
So,
And so Tuesday?
yeah.
So I was just gonna say, my only concern is every committee did something a little different.
But I can't hear two people at once, please.
Every subcommittee just formatted their information a little differently. And, I feel like that creates some confusion. I don't know what the solution there is, but,
That's
what
the
is
chair's
everything's?
problem.
Yeah,
Some are numbers and some are
Well, I feel like we were one of the,
discussions.
we were one of the few that actually threw out the benefits and detriments in as explicit a way, as the others, and so,
Well, I would assume at the end, we'll have to come up with an executive summary.
Yeah, but
Try to tie it all together.
Because my question for the subcommittees are the other subcommittees going to list benefits and detriments in their next version of this report, or are they going to basically take this and
I
edit
can
accordingly?
rephrase that, please, subcommittees. That's what we're trying to do.
Please follow the outline you gave us.
Yes, please, do that. Benefits and detriments of keeping it, benefits and detriments of, and I keep on saying keeping, I really shouldn't, because it's not there.
Yeah.
It's benefits and detriments of rebuilding is the word I should be saying on Spa Road. Benefits and detriments of building on Forest Drive. Please list those 4 boxes.
Okay, 'cause thank you, 'cause I don't want us to be the only subcommittee having done that, because I feel like it feels premature You know, I mean, everyone should do that, or none of us should do that.
I'm
So
asking
I would
everybody
ask
to
you
do
as
that.
the chair to make sure that either we all do that, or none of us
So
do that.
my request hasn't changed, so I asked for those 4 boxes, I asked the stakeholders, issues, and that's all I asked here. As we move on, I'm asking for what are the decisions to be made, so, and I haven't heard a whole lot of that come up, so I don't think that's been an issue, but city council's gonna have some decisions, state and county apparently have decisions, so to the extent possible, highlight who is the decision maker and at what stage they make these decisions, so that when we give this to the city council, which includes the mayor, they see, hey,
They have a
county
roadmap.
gets to decide this, yeah.
got a roadmap.
And make it as useful as possible.
Jared, I also view this letter as a stage setter for the public meeting on September 3rd.
That's exactly.
And so so we should have some discussion about what the format expectations are for
So,
that meeting.
thank you, appreciate that. So let me get back to what I was gonna say, then make sure I do come back to it if I forget. So the body of this was just all your reports back to me. I tried putting at the end some highlighted questions at the end, mostly to the city staff. Below that, like I said once or twice, is questions for each of you to look at each other, because it's questions one committee is asking the other committee to look at. And then I put on the intro. The intro, I think, is relatively vanilla, except there is one paragraph that's not, and it includes, so it starts out, we call out important and intertwined governance and timing questions. And here I'm calling out, and I'm sorry, I made myself a note to add page numbers to this, so there'll be page numbers in the next version. So I apologize for that. But anyway, I'm calling out the fact that a couple people brought up, we're not talking about a competitive process for disposing of the land. That's what it's called, disposing of the land if the facility gets moved to Forest Drive. Tom's proposal does capture a roadmap to avoid that, where you can build on Forest Drive and do competitive process. It's a $200,000 penalty essentially for that. So I'm trying to call that out. I used the word recommendation for one line, which I thought was not controversial, and that was just, we all want to build this as soon as possible, trying to get this done. But if you're using the word recommendation on what I thought was an innocuous recommendation, I'll take that out. I know, so if anyone's uncomfortable with that line, I'll change the word recommendation to, if the council wants to build this as soon as possible, this is something to consider. If you all are more comfortable with taking that recommendation, I will. Any
Save you
corrections
some
on that?
heartache if you do that.
I'm sorry?
I'd save you some heartache if you do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you take it out?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
That's what's- yeah.
I appreciate that.
It's also respectful of council.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that it's respectful one way or the other to make a recommendation, but I can take it out. So on that, because I think the reports are not controversial, it's what you guys want. I think that's the only line that's potentially controversial. It continues to just call out the fact that this $200,000 penalty. I added a caveat reinforcing what we've discussed multiple times, that we are not considering weighing the governance or policy decision regarding alternative locations for the PW maintenance facility, or questions not posed above. So that's just a caveat. I don't think that's controversial.
So
I think
you're gonna take out that,
I'm gonna
starting with that sentence, therefore it is a task force all the way through that next paragraph, right? That way.
I'm not taking it out. What I was suggesting I was gonna do is the one line in the middle. So start out, we call out, I'm still calling it out, but instead of saying it's the recommendation, I'll change it to something like, if the city council endeavors to build a new site as quickly as possible, then the city should quickly decide on which I'll even take out what they should do. Then the city may prefer, or may suggested something, I'll work on that, get good words, big words, sorry. Property that it prefers to build on the land and negotiate. So I still want to call out that that's an option that's on the table for the city council to consider. But I won't put in recommendation, and I won't put in that it should do anything. I'll work on that later.
I don't mean to belabor the point, but I think it is a little bit more than the use of the word recommendation. And I think it gets back to fundamentally, what are we doing? Are we evaluating the choice of stay and rebuild, or engage in this land swap transaction and build? Or are we evaluating two sites independently? And there's slightly different questions. My take has always been that the land swap transaction is pending, and that's the issue that we're evaluating. And so that's why I object to the paragraph, because I thought, I mean, I agree we're not supposed to weigh in on the governance decision. I think that's beyond our scope. But if one of the choices is the land swap transaction, then that's why we spent as much time as we did evaluating the reasonableness of the land swap transaction.
Do you have thoughts on how, well, let me just ask it this way. Does everyone agree it's good to call out that there's this third and middle path, I guess, where there's the city would be buying Forest Drive, not necessarily making that decision as a swap, because it still could be potentially selling through a competitive process. I'm just trying to call that out as an option between rebuilding, swap. I'm trying to call out that there's a middle road of moving, but not swap, but actually that process.
I sort of go back to why is that even the middle road though, right?
Because it's moving the facility, but it's.
But we've already been through that process and city council made a decision not to. But for this proposal,
Well,
this
clearly the-
proposal.
Clearly, the council is still considering moving Forest Drive, otherwise I'm going to form a task
Well,
force.
but I guess my point would be, if you're gonna go to that extent and say, you know, you're gonna introduce that as an option, then why wouldn't you introduce any other site as an option? Why is that the only site? Right? That's the fundamental question. The fundamental question is, do we move public works or don't we? Right?
Say the last part again?
Do we move it or don't we?
Well, specifically, do we move it to Forest Drive?
Well, hold on. The fundamental question is, do we move it or don't we? That decision was made at some point. No, we're not gonna move it. We're gonna leave it here. We looked at alternative sites, we did the studies, we did whatever. We're gonna move it here. A proposal comes in and says, hey, this might be a better deal for you. The council has said, we think it might be a better deal for us because in the broad vision, it gives us some money to do some other things that are great for the community. And now as a task force, we're looking at it trying to say, does that make sense? That's kind of my view of it, right? And it's, does that make sense, not one versus the other, the current plan versus do we change our plans now based on this proposal? And if we start entering caveats about, you know, how we view that, then we open the door to everything. Oh, well, if we're gonna reopen the idea of moving public works, then maybe we look at other sites beyond that one, right?
So how about if I change it to, these are things we're not considering. We're not looking at other sites, and we're not evaluating this third option or middle option. Just calling out that it is an option, and we're not examining it.
That's fair. That's within, I think, our
It
remit.
sounds like you feel strongly that it's a logical thing, they should have in front of them. You feel that they need to know that that's an option.
Yeah.
But the committee's going, wait a minute, that's changing our charge or making,
Exactly.
so.
I'm calling it out because I think they need to know that it's an option, but we don't need to evaluate it as one.
It's not in our.
Okay, that works.
I have a question for the Spa Road site. If that site is chosen, is that already a done deal that they will do it, what was approved? Or does the council now need to approve again and go over what we've turned up, that there are all these problems that really should have been addressed, and the gas tanks need to go?
Having been there, council is going to do whatever it wants to do, whenever it wants to do it.
So really, we need to think of this not as either we've already got this done plan with a building plan that's already approved, or we do this other one. That's not done either.
Nothing done.
So.
Yeah, this is, the only thing that's going to be done is hopefully we'll be done with our recommendation and.
And you will be giving us more work to do. Because you've opened an awful lot of, I don't want to say cans of worms, but you've opened a lot of areas that we have not thoroughly evaluated and must. David, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact is, Williams Way and Phil, we didn't look at it because there was no plan to do anything on it. So that would-
In fact, to tack on, because I know Minard has this point in that you all got received this email. If the city council moved to another site and went through some process to dispose of Spa Road, that isn't an ordinance that will go have multiple public hearings. So to the extent that anyone has ideas of what else should be done on Spa Road, that would be through that ordinance process. Or it could be done just through your regular advocacy, but that's why I don't think that's a task force issue.
Well, but let me add to that, and I received Minor's proposal also. I am always open for compromise. So I'm not clear that other considerations might not be included. You know, if what Minor has proposed, and I'm not advocating for that, but what he has proposed fits into Tom's plan in some way, or, he's gone, fits into the Board of Ed's proposal, then why would we not be given the opportunity to consider it? So that's where
You should have that, but then it should follow a normal process, right?
yeah, oh, it will, no matter what.
Okay. All right, thank you for staying late. As you know, I try to be respectful of everyone's time. A lot of good questions. I'm not suggesting that they're answered. Follow up by emails among your groups. Is this my revised timeline sound workable? You get the comments tomorrow. I'll incorporate it, send it back to you. Hopefully, you guys say I did what I said I would do, and you give me the authority to send it out. Okay.
Thursday, I won't be back till Tuesday, so if I don't tell
Hopefully, when you get Wednesday, you can say yes, I did what I said I was going to do.